My name is Dr. Geoffrey Dean. I am from McLean, Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. I was a classical pianist turned jazz, and I also wrote a book during my dissertation called Kenny Kirkland's Harmonic and Rhythmic Language, a guide for pianists, but really all that harmony and rhythmic stuff is really good for anybody. They don't have to be a pianist. It's just a lot of language and a lot of concepts.
That's awesome. I like your setup. I see you got a nice collection behind you.
Yeah, man, mostly hand-me-down. This one I got because my mentor, Donald Brown, told me to find these. There's a set of 4 albums from Korea called Jazz on a Saturday Afternoon. And he told me to get that stuff. I couldn't find it for years. I had to no one's ever digitized it, but it's a pretty cool little set of stuff. It's got Dizzy Gillespie sitting on a jam session with a bunch of New York guys from like 1968. So, but yeah, man, I'm always trying to just add stuff that I like and find stuff that, new stuff, and try and listen to that. Just round out the collection.
Absolutely.
You got some books over there, man. You got a whole bunch of stuff.
I got books. I got a bunch of boxes on this side, but I've got a collection myself. I met Chick Corea once.
Oh,
he
cool,
played
man.
at JMU. I was 1 year out of JMU, but I still knew all the ways to get around. So they had security, and I was like, but they don't know about this door. So I got backstage and met him, and then apparently people were very upset that a student got backstage.
It's okay. And I know Chick's always been a nice guy from everything I heard.
Super nice.
Very welcoming. Returned a lot of people's letters and things like that. What do you got there?
This is something I picked up at an antique store. I guess it was like super early.
Interesting.
But it's like out. Like
like that free period. See, I know there's a bunch of recordings during that period of time. I've only nitpicked because I only listen to so much free stuff, but I still always want to know what's out there.
Yeah, and I mean I like Chick's free stuff, or at least on that record, because it was still like filled with his really cool digital kind of lines and stuff.
Yeah.
And
I didn't know how much of that free stuff, if it's all on piano or if he's also playing it on Rhodes, because that's what like Miles had him on at the time. I don't know navigating all that. What the deal is there, but
I'd have to listen back to it. It's been
so many Chick albums too. It's like every time I think I sort of know, like, dude just wrote so much music and played so much music.
Yeah, I've never done a big deep dive into like fusion and stuff, so like I've listened to like the obligatory Return to Forever stuff, like 500 Miles High, but
I've just picked bits and pieces, and I feel like that's all you can do unless you just want to become a total Chick disciple. But like you pick which stuff you want.
So today I want to dig into Kenny Kirkland and the other kind of, I guess, in your article you mentioned the 4 pillars of modern jazz. So this is going to be like the 4 pillars plus 1, because we want to talk about Kenny Kirkland.
Yeah.
McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett, and then Kenny Kirkland. And for this interview, I want it to be beneficial for people that are just jazz fans that aren't artists, but I know as we dig into these artists, we can't avoid talking about music theory, because that's one of the things that makes them sound the way they sound. So I think it's okay if we dip our toe into some theory, and then or dive into theory, either way. And then at the end, I want to give some advice for teachers, because I always want to encourage teachers, whether they're a high school jazz band teacher or a college teacher or just a private teacher, like we want to get jazz more into the pedagogy. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to spend some time at the end talking about that. But why don't we dive into let's go through the 4 pillars, and then we'll close out with Kenny Kirkland. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about McCoy Tyner first. I think McCoy Tyner is one of the only ones of this list, McCoy, Chick, Herbie, and Keith Jarrett, that pretty much stayed acoustic for his entire career.
Yeah.
So he's kind of a good, I think, bridge for us from straight ahead jazz into the new stuff. But how would you describe McCoy Tyner's sound, or what's unique about McCoy when you listen to him?
Yeah, it's nice that we have early McCoy playing with Coltrane on like that Coltrane sound record. I mean, McCoy very much comes out of the tradition, the bebop idiom. Originally he's playing with that kind of language, but he's also exploring rhythms, and then eventually he explores the shapes, especially what we'll call chordal harmony. We'll get into that, and then also pentatonics. I know people kind of throw those two things out, chordal stuff and pentatonics, as if that's all McCoy did, but there's so many levels of nuance and detail to that, and where he takes those things. McCoy also really brought up the energy on the piano. It goes in with all that stuff. Also, his wanting to grab low notes to add like almost a boom and then go up. And I think that also, he's playing with Coltrane for like 5 years, and Coltrane and him are both kind of taking that idea of the sheets of sound, where McCoy lays a foundation harmonically, and then whether or not he wants to stay inside of that sound, inside meaning like you grab an F, and all you play is F minor stuff, or if he wants to grab an F and play something a half step up, suddenly it sounds really out. And he's using those pentatonic languages to spell those shapes in really clear ways, and then he can access them whether or not he wants to. Basically consonance versus dissonance, or dissonance versus consonance. And I can always go to the piano too. I don't know how it'll come through with the mic, and I don't know how much you want example wise, but I'm always happy to if it works, and if not, don't worry about it.
Let's hear. Is the piano behind you?
The piano's right here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So why don't you just play a few notes and we can see if it comes through?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Does that work? Huh?
Yeah, man. Google and Zoom have their work cut out for them.
Good. I'm glad someone's doing it.
Yeah.
Just to illustrate those things, but this is harmony stacked in thirds, is what we were talking about, tertial harmony. And McCoy, you move through a scale. That's one way. But McCoy decided that he liked these shapes in fourths better, which become this more open and more modern sound that every pianist ever since has at least had to tap into this. So that's a whole, different sound. And then he'll couple it with the left-hand boom stuff. And that's just me playing F minor stuff. Maybe I go up a half step for it, to make it sound more dissonant, which is what McCoy will do. So the side steps, those kinds of things, he does that stuff really well.
He does, and
he does it.
It's so fluid.
Exactly.
And you mentioned before, like, the nuance to it, because when people want to just like sound like McCoy, they'll do the open fifth,
right,
and then they'll just play pentatonic. But I mean, his pentatonics were so, I guess to reuse the term nuance. Like if he's in F minor, when he's playing he might use a C minor pentatonic.
Right.
So you have some notes, and then when he's sidestepping, he'll go by half steps. And then I've also analyzed some of his stuff where he'll move in whole steps.
Yes.
And that really creates it out. Like he's in F minor, and then he's doing like C, B flat, A flat, G flat, E minor, and then he shifts back to F, and you're like, what did I just go through?
Right. And he wrote, there's a song, I don't know, I believe it's on the Real McCoy, there's a song of his called 4x5, where it's like he wrote, is that, I believe that's it, where he's moving around in whole steps. He wrote that almost as a practice device. He's just, it's like E, F sharp, it's like, so he was practicing that, and that is something that was brought up to me, is that he doesn't just move them around in the same way. He'll move around in whole steps. I've even was given a lesson by a pianist named Dave Frank, who would go.
He's from the Tristano School.
He is from the Tristano School. Yeah, I studied with him for about 3 years through Zoom lessons when I left Berkeley. I really got into the Tristano, Dave McKenna kind of solo piano. I always liked walking bass, so I continued with Dave. But he, at one point, I went into the McCoy thing with him because he articulated it well. But he talked about McCoy going up a minor third, down a minor second, up a minor third, down a minor second, and that eventually will land you back at home if you keep doing that all the way up. So very intricate ways to move around that.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to think about it slow, but to execute it fast, which is what McCoy's doing without it even seeming hard. That's where the trick is. We can sort of talk about these concepts real fast. Like you say, you can become a McCoy clone in about 1 minute by learning the low thing and that. But to really be great at it is just such another level of fluidity, like you're talking about.
That's such a good point.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So, he worked it out, and he kept working it out. I think I talked in that article at the end, like, he's barely doing any pentatonics or anything in that Coltrane sound, and I like that as an example of where he starts. And then, he plays that same song. It's like 1975 on that Song for My Lady, and, Donald Brown had me transcribe that. That's why I did. And every chord, man, like, if it's a G minor, he's playing, like, a C-sharp minor pentatonic, like, he was going out, like everything is the tritone sub for what's there, and he just took it. He takes it as far as he wanted to take it, and it shows you can go really out with it, or you can look at him in the early '60s and find a more in hybrid.
I wish that the later McCoy, when he's really matured on those concepts, is more talked about, because like even if like if you do like Google like a McCoy Tyner transcription, maybe you're like, man, I want to know what he's doing. Maybe I don't have the time to sit down and transcribe it myself note for note. Almost everything out there is in his early period, either Blues on the Corner or it's a Love Supreme. And a Love Supreme has some great solos, but you can tell he's still figuring out this pentatonic language.
Totally. And he continues to just explore harmonically too. I had a teacher. There's a record he did in like '89 with George Benson, and it's fantastic. He's just it's not his record, so he's kind of doing some really nice comping, and like I don't know. I was told to transcribe an intro for a tune of his there, and it's very forward thinking. Still, some stuff that he would not have been doing in the '60s that. He was doing in the late 80s. So I do think it's unexplored turf. There needs to be almost like a McCoy from 75 on book or something. I would love that. Totally. Well,
let's pivot to the next pianist that also used a lot of fourths, chordal harmony, used a lot of side steps, but still had a very distinct sound, which I would say would be Chick Corea. Let's open it up. What does Chick Corea sound like to you? What are some of your favorite things about Chick Corea's sound?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's the best transition. I think that he absorbed McCoy while still being his own individual better than pretty much anyone. Like, again, Chick comes out of the tradition. I know his biggest influences. That's why I really like that Fungi Mama solo, because he's still playing like his influences. The first I'll go this piano. Like basically, Chick comes out of three people before he becomes himself, which is Monk, which he does a lot of kind of sidestep stuff. Like that's his Monk kind of stuff. And then he comes out of Bud Powell where he's just playing bebop. And then he eventually comes out of McCoy where he's playing the chordal stuff, but he creates his own language. And we can eventually talk about how there's a little crossover in the rhythmic stuff that he does with Herbie. Like Chick and Herbie seem to cross over in some of that more rhythmic, tight stuff. But yeah, basically, Chick became, as he crystallized, he becomes like a lighter version of McCoy. McCoy's very heavy, right? Like, and Chick, if you listen to that Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, he is playing at blazing tempos and still able to keep his left hand so light and his right hand so light while playing this very new language. He's playing very modern language that he kind of crafted himself. A lot of it, I have to say. I mean, he's grabbing those chordal voicings, but Chick also did some creative stuff. Like if you look at that Matrix solo where he's taking just a regular, maybe the blues, like a voicing we do for the blues or something, and he's moving that around in minor thirds. So he'll see that as an F7 voicing, that as an F7 voicing. So you can be playing blues all day, and if you're in, it sounds like that, but you start doing some of the chick stuff. And so it's like very creative use of ideas that were already there, but applying them in his own ways. And so Chick moves those voicings around in minor thirds, right? Like diminished stuff. There's a lot of diminished stuff in Chick's stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. I have a book called The Diminished Cycle that talks about exactly that, moving those thirds, because all those thirds are in the diminished, or those chordal voicings, when you move them in minor thirds, they're in the diminished scale.
Right.
And they're all either chord tones or altered extensions, so it all fits.
Right. So it's like a very creative way to use what we have, maybe in not the most traditional way, maybe not just grabbing that same standard stock voicing that we all start learning, but then Chick really was good at growing and finding new ways to be creative. Chick also was obviously a prodigious composer. He just never stopped composing. But I don't know of anyone who can play as fast and still sound light without tripping over themselves than Chick. I really think
crisp.
Yeah, so crisp and so lack of tension. And then, of course, I think it's worth mentioning that of all these four guys, that Chick is definitely the one who embraces Latin music the most. I don't know of many Latin threes at all, tunes in three that are Latin, and Chick has two. I think La Fiesta and this song called What Was, which is off of Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. So, like, it's not even only one kind of Latin. Like, he's, again, very good at taking that music and finding ways to be creative with it in ways that other people just, they weren't, I don't know. And so,
the creativity. I mean, I remember coming across Matrix and Now He Sings, Now He Sobs in college, and it was just so ear opening. I remember our professor was like, "Does anybody know the form of this?" Like, he just put it on. I never heard it. And I realized it's a 12-bar blues.
You would never know the way. It's, I mean, you really have to do a lot of listening to just know that right away.
Yeah,
and that's what Donald Brown. Donald Brown has some of the biggest ears I've ever heard. His ears are incredible, and I was so happy when I was getting into these sounds, because I came into the music through Ahmad Jamal and then bebop, like Hampton Hawes, bluesy, the soulful stuff, and then I was like, Donald, this is a lot on my ears. And he was like, when he first heard it, he told me he had to digest it in chunks and let it kind of settle and then keep going back through it, and eventually his ears warmed up to those sounds. I'm always amazed at the people I meet who are like, oh, I came into the music through Chick Corea. I'm like, man, you got some big ears, or you got something special, because I that was intimidating music for me for a while. And it's still, I mean, I have a lot of respect for it. It is hard, and it is, technical. Yeah. And so
it's fascinating to listen to. I think that's what is always like the analyst in me just like sparks up and is just so delighted, because I'm just like listening, like, what was that? Why was that? How was that? Like, it's so fascinating. Like, I have the transcription pulled up, and like, I mean, he's doing planing differently than McCoy a little bit. Like, he'll come up with this little idea and then just move that idea around. Yeah. Where McCoy will move a whole scale around. So.
Right. Like, there's that thing in Matrix where he'll grab this as a sus chord. Chick does that, and he's just grabbing a certain sus chord he likes, and just moving around in whole steps. But it's such a refreshing sound, and he does it so naturally. It doesn't sound academic when he's doing that stuff. That's the big thing. And it's really easy to sound academic with McCoy. A little harder. You can Chick. I don't know. It's harder to fake Chick. But it's the same thing with someone, I know saxophonists are all super sensitive about this, with you want to study Coltrane, but you don't want to just sound like Coltrane.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we all struggle with that with the greats from our own instruments, where you want to tap into what they're doing without just ripping it blatantly and doing nothing else with it, or you know what I mean, or not just making it part of your entire language. But that's that. With that, I'd say on that McCoy thing, you can still hear him practicing certain licks and certain rhythms. So like we're all trying to interject what we're learning at any time, and so that's part of the balance of being a student.
I'm remembering this interview I saw with Chick, and I think it gets at the idea of like academia and just inserting what you practice. And this interview led me to believe that Chick was operating more from his ear than like, oh, here's this hip thing that I've constructed and crafted, I'm going to insert it. Because this person was asking him like, hey, I love on this record this amazing lick. Can you tell me what you were working on at the time to do this? And he was like, I don't know. You listen to the record and tell me.
Yeah, yeah.
That was either a teaching moment,
right,
or maybe that's like a little window into Chick's development where he's like, hey, I'm just exploring sounds. I'm not really so concerned with the music theory. I'm more concerned with the end result. So maybe that's why his sound is a little bit less contrived and mathematic.
I agree. And I think we'll end up talking about a little of that same thing with Keith when we get there. I think that when you come to him, it's that same thing. But like I was told by, I believe, Donald or someone that opening chord in Matrix, that Chick, someone asked him about how he formed that. He was like, I just kind of grabbed what I wanted to at the time, that in the head. And so that kind of is going to what you're saying. It wasn't like he was trying to just grab this certain kind of voicing or something that we learned. Like he's experimenting, and it sounds like he might not even play that thing the same way every time he plays it, which is something to consider, that way you're not locked on some goal. You kind of want to get the concepts and then see how you can develop them, instead of here's the Petrushka voicing from whatever. Like, some stuff gets real boxed in, and luckily Chick doesn't. And I think that's really cool about Chick Corea. And there's no shortage of his compositions to play. Like I say, it's just I've definitely played more originals from Chick than anyone else, than McCoy, Herbie, or Keith.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't explored his book very much. That's awesome. Well, let's pivot to Keith Jarrett. I think he's a good transition point. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've listened to more Keith Jarrett's acoustic stuff than his electric stuff.
Yeah.
Same with Chick, but yeah, Keith. So yeah, I guess how would you describe Keith Jarrett, or how would he be different in your ears to maybe Chick Corea or something?
Yeah, well, Chick can play any rhythm and stuff. I would never call Chick rigid, but I would say that Chick stays in the time more, whereas Keith, there's a loose fluidity of playing with time in kind of a floaty way that Keith Jarrett has established. When you listen to the early Keith Jarrett stuff with Blakey, there's a Secret Love. He is playing so fast. There's not as much left hand as Chick, but he is playing so fast. But it's it's not bebop language. Like when you talk about all these guys, I think all of them are affected by bebop language, but Keith the least so. Keith he's a great exercise in feel. Like he's a great exercise in patience, the way that he rolls out solos, where he can be very constrained, and you maybe if you didn't know Keith Jarrett, you'd say, oh, is this all this guy can do? But by the end of the solo, he just has opened it up into so much musicality. Again, he is not academic. He is very much coming from the heart, and that's always been his thing. He goes out of his way to let you know that he's not overplanning anything. That's his big claim to fame with the solo piano, which
his own concert.
And I think that's also awesome that Keith is this incredible solo pianist, but also an incredible ensemble player. Sometimes you get one or the other. Like Rama Jamal didn't record a solo piano record till I think he was 89 years old. Like some guys only do one or the other, or maybe do a little of both. Keith just did them both awesome. Like
I feel like a recent pianist that followed in Keith's footsteps in that way would be Brad Mehldau, because he's
Absolutely.
shaking stuff up in both regards, solo piano and trio work. But that's
Yeah.
interesting that you bring up Keith in his ability to slowly roll things out, because I
Hmm.
remember listening to one of his. I was looking for some rhythm changes to transcribe. I was like, man,
Hmm.
I gotta shed my rhythm changes. I was like, ooh, okay, Keith Jarrett playing Olio. This has got to
Yeah.
be good.
Yeah.
And it was like 10 choruses of like him just toying around with this little like major pentatonic scale thing. And it was
Right.
just like
Right.
totally threw me off guard.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to get out of it. I remember going through looking for some Keith on rhythm changes too, and deciding that it wasn't what I was looking for. I think
Mm.
that I have gone to more. What was I thinking? I've gone to. I lost my train of thought. Um, yeah, I forget. I forget. Something about how he was rolling something out, but yeah, basically, I've gone. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I've gone to more Hank Jones solos for rhythm changes
Mm.
than anyone else because I've heard more diversity of language within the same box of traditional rhythm changes
Mm.
from Hank Jones than anyone. So depends on what you're looking for at the time. I
Yeah.
wanted traditional language, and again, like I say, Keith was not where I ended up finding that.
Yeah.
Um, not to say he doesn't tap into that, but I'm looking for certain chord surrounds and things like that
Yeah.
with that. Whereas Keith is playing very, very melodically, and it's less of that bebop language. So it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. And like you say, it'll
Mm.
be a slow roll out sometimes.
Yeah.
So whether or not you like to do full transcriptions or do chunks.
Mhm.
That's its own subject for students. I used to want to just do the full transcription on everything, and then there's only so much time in the day, so you kind of got
Yeah.
to pick chunks. But
Yeah.
I think also looking at Keith Jarrett's left hand um, kind of devices that he developed for solo piano. I mean, that could take you years and years and years alone. So it's like you
Yeah.
kind of figure out what you like with Keith, and then you go down that rabbit hole because he's got a lot to offer. It's
Yeah.
you have to box him in.
And that's where so it's interesting is like I actually got deeper into Brad Mehldau before I got into Keith Jarrett, because when I first listened to Keith Jarrett, I was put off by the vocalizations, which I know some people are, and but once you listen to Keith Jarrett enough, you're like, oh man, I don't care if he's grunting, like what he's
Oh
playing
yeah,
is killer.
yeah,
But that happened after I heard Brad Mehldau. And of course, Brad Meldau's solo stuff is filled with all of those really like momentum building devices in the left hand. And then I started listening to the Köln concert. And I'm like, oh, Keith was the one that did this. Like
yep.
he did this first. He opened the door, and now other people have gone through.
And I believe Brad gives him the credit it's due. I remember the first Brad transcription I ever did was his Blackbird.
Mm.
And at the very end, he goes into like a solo piano thing that's quite funky and awesome. And I
Hmm.
remember someone asking Brad, where did that come from? And him basically saying Keith Jarrett. Like that solo piano outro funk thing, he is thinking about Keith Jarrett. So I love when people acknowledge their influences correctly. Some people kind of try and hide and hide, say it's all magic and stuff. But I very much love, Brad giving Keith that credit because it kind of confirms what we're talking about. That's and I would say Aaron Parks is a continued extension of that today.
Yeah.
If you listen to early Aaron Parks, because he's been recording since he was like 15, it's much more traditional bebop in those early records, and then it lightens up the sound, the freedom, the fluidity. I think it's the Keith Jarrett to Brad to Aaron Parks, and you maybe get some of that with Sullivan Fortner too.
Yeah.
Today.
Well,
But Brad's serious.
with Aaron Parks, and especially in regards to Keith Jarrett taking his time to roll stuff out, I
Yeah.
think it takes a certain degree of confidence as a player. Because I think, I mean, I don't want to ascribe it just to musicians that are still maturing. I think, I know I sometimes do it where you're tempted to give all you've got or to show the audience all you can do, like right off the bat.
Right.
Like, look, I've got some technique and I want to blow you out of the water. But like
Right.
Aaron Parks always, I don't want to say always, but I mean, I feel like every time I listen to him, he opts for the more musical choice than just displaying technique. And
Right.
Keith Jarrett too. He's like, I'm creating music in the real moment. Yes, you already know I can play
Right.
burning stuff all day long, but listen to this instead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a certain maturity there and confidence, like you say. It's surprisingly hard to develop that and form that. You know, I think that's something that every player, professional or not, will continue to battle. And so, I don't know, you know, not to say that some people aren't exactly where they want to be, but I know that for me, I'm still trying to chase that sort of patience and figure out how to roll things out in the most, you know, touching way
Yeah.
musically while applying all these ideas that we
Yeah.
academically try and learn. And that's the, you know, the bridge of the heart and the mind. And,
No.
you know, Keith seems to have worked that out pretty good.
Well, I was listening to your album this morning before we started, and I was definitely hearing that. So I think you're succeeding in that endeavor. You definitely have
That's good. You know, I appreciate hearing that from you. And I think one way that we all get better at that, whether or not we like it, is recording ourselves and listening back to ourselves because it can be honest sometimes. It's hard for me to listen to myself. I know a lot of people, but you know, I've heard enough teachers say that recording yourself is your best teacher. And that goes into its own thing too. You know, when we got to Kenny, but also Mulgrew, that I've had teachers talk about that's a skill you also have to really form as a sideman in recording studios. That if you're only given one solo, you better say what you want to say in it, but you also can't maybe reach for something you might not be able to get to because it's recorded forever. And so, you know, I don't know, George Colligan told me he always respected Mulgrew's ability to go in the studio, play what he wanted to say without overstepping and finding a way to be your most efficient in a 3-minute take or a 10-minute take, whatever time you're given, and how are you going to use that time to roll out your solo perfect, whether it's short or long. And that's just a big battle we all fight.
It is so tough. I think it's I think that's something where maybe non-musicians don't understand the battle of like you have to be perfect, like on point, especially as a sideman, or even if worse, if you're a studio musician, like
Right.
you don't want to be screwing up someone else's takes.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
it is stressful.
But you don't want to make it a boring take either. You got to play it safe, but you know you don't want to be so safe that it never gets anyone involved or gets any blood pumping. So it's certainly a battle.
Yeah, and I mean
Yeah.
that reminds me of like you mentioned Hank Jones. I think he was like the Paul Chambers of piano. Like the amount of records Hank Jones has been on is just ridiculous.
Yeah, there's no shortage of material there. And he's one of the guys who still kept playing straight ahead right through the 70s. There's a lot. I came back to him because I was told about this. I think it's like the Great American Jazz Quartet or something. It's like he did 3 or 4 records. They're all in Japanese on Spotify if you find them. But he's just playing really great straight ahead in the 70s when a lot of people jumped into fusion. And so you have decades of Hank Jones just playing great straight ahead. And so there's lots to transcribe in there, and lots of good language.
Well, let's talk about Herbie next.
Yeah, it's a big one.
That is a big one. That is a hard one. But well, why don't we do it this way? What period of Herbie did you
Yeah.
first hear or first start appreciating?
It's a good question. That's a good way to go into it. I remember being shown a video when I was in Boston of Herbie playing with Miles' second great quintet. He was playing a solo on No Blues, and it was swinging, but the language was not just traditional blues language. I was like, I don't really understand like some of this language he's using, even though it swings real hard, and you know, and that's the beginnings of him for me.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know right before that he was playing some the pop friendly stuff. You know, he on his own writing the Watermelon Man and Cantaloupe Island and all that. But then he just kept growing. Again, he's another guy who you can just track the growth over time, and he's awesome because he also grew with the changing genres of the time and did it really well. When other people maybe, they'll take a shot at another genre and it doesn't always fit. But you have Herbie coming out of the soul jazz, hard bop period. Then you have him, pushing modern jazz forward with the Miles Second Quintet from like 63 until 69 or so. And then he immediately embraces all the Rhodes and all that. I mean, I know he played a little with that with Miles, but like just creating that funk sound with the Headhunters and stuff. Yeah. It's like just doing it really well. And then of course, finally embracing like drum machines and stuff in the 80s and creating Rocket, which I don't even consider a jazz tune. It's like a breakdancing, like almost hip hop tune or something. But like it just shows the versatility of the man. I mean, he just never stopped learning. Like learning all that early tech was a pain. I mean, imagine like the little green MS DOS whatever screen, like, and he's programming just the most ridiculously great beats. So Herbie, and that makes sense. I think Herbie, wasn't he going to be an electrical engineer or something if he wasn't going to be a jazz pianist? I think I remember hearing something like that. So his ability to go into the technology and embrace it, that makes a little more sense to me. Yeah. But there's really no one who jumped genres like him, or within the changing time periods. I guess it almost all still fits into jazz, but Herbie's got rhythm, Herbie's got harmony. And yeah, he knows, I don't know, and he's also a great composer too, and composes in different genres. He make that pop music that people like, and then he'll write a song like The Sorcerer or something that's like one of the hardest tunes for jazz people to play. And I think that's cool too, the accessibility, and not being above that. And that's also where eventually Kenny and them it leads to the next generation, because it still was taboo for a lot of those guys to go into pop world or do some of that stuff. And I think Herbie helped break some of those borders down. Because if he's, in the Miles Quintet, but then he can go make a breakdance tune, then who is anyone to say that he shouldn't or can't do that?
I think too with him, like, I love when he did venture into other genres and stuff, like, he wasn't afraid to, I think, like, tamp down his, like, being willing to play something out or dissonant or something. Like, it reminds me of, like, Duke Ellington in that regard. Because, like, Duke, he's, like, one of the most popular big bands, and then he'll play a piano solo, and it's, like, weird clusters, and you're like, what? Like, how is this guy... Like, how does he get away with this? And, like, when you listen to Chameleon, it's like, all right, this is like a 12-minute funk tune that's just in the pocket the whole time. Yeah. And then you hear his synth solo, and it's just, like, the weirdest, exploring weird sounds, and you're like, I love it, but who else could get away with this?
That's very true. I didn't really think about that, but you're absolutely right. When I remember looking for more Ellington stuff to see how he soloed, and coming to the same conclusions as you just said. I was like, this is not what I expected from how Ellington would navigate changes as a soloist. And Herbie's that way too. You can't count on anything. And even with if you look at how he solos over, like, when they make him replay, or when he chooses to replay Cantaloupe Island or Watermelon Man, he's certainly playing them different than he played them when he recorded them, and you just don't know which way he's going to go. It might turn into a rhythmic, I won't say mess because it's a beautiful mess, but, almost rhythmically driven as opposed to harmonies. And other times he'll be riffing organically on licks and stuff, and it's just like, the creativity just flows out of him. I can tell why him and Chick were buddies. I feel like their creative minds were on the same wavelength about certain things. And, they did some two-piano stuff. I don't know if McCoy... I certainly don't know if Keith doing any two-piano stuff, but, there's videos of Chick and Herbie playing two pianos together, and I think that's cool, and it shows how they tie together in a way that they were cool enough with each other to do that. Not everyone wants to do that. I think Keith's happy playing solo piano.
Is there anything that you ever transcribed from Herbie, or little nuggets of language that you like?
Yeah, I will say, I was told by Donald Brown that to really listen to the Plug Nickel album, the Miles Live at the Plug Nickel album, not only for Herbie but for how hard Ron Carter swings. For the nice thing is because they released that full Plug Nickel, you get some of the same tunes on different nights, and you can hear how they don't just play them the same. I will say, so I record all of You. Herbie plays on that album, and they play it on Miles in Europe as well. And it's interesting because as you go through it, like Miles definitely took or really listened to Ahmad Jamal's All of You, because Ahmad Jamal just plays the tune and basically just does a turnaround for like 5 minutes. And as you listen to Miles play that tune over time, that's what he does. They eventually just play the form maybe one time. Maybe they'll just even play the head. And then they go into a turnaround. There's a 3-6-2-5. And it's like, so that's interesting that Miles sort of went that direction. But on the Plug Nickel album, they're still playing the form. And one thing I always know that I stole from Herbie on this is this: if you're playing a B flat 7, Herbie is great at the tritone sub stuff. So he'll play a B flat 7 and he'll play off the flat 9 of it, B, E, A, D. D is the third of B flat 7. So he's getting up there using like a half step up. So that's the language. So that's like a real modern, it's built in fourths. He's playing B minor as if it was going to E7, and then he's landing, back in bebop world. But I think that's one of those things from him that I got where he's not only playing a tritone sub, but he's playing it in intervals that make it sound more out, which is that McCoy influence. And he's playing it he's not using it as a lick. It's just a sound that he's accessing. So that's one Herbie thing I've done. It's, whatever your dominant chord is, you go up a half step and you spell out the next 4 notes in fourths, and that will get you a very out-sounding sound, but it lands back at home. And so Herbie's real slick like that. And that's the big modern thing that Donald Brown would always tell me, is that you go anywhere you want as long as you know where you're going to land. As long as you know where you're going to end up, you can go do that Chick or McCoy thing, or where you're going around in whole steps, but you better know where you're going to end up. Have an ending goal, or just end up there. And then it doesn't matter how you got there. And that Kenny Kirkland will talk about that too, about using more obscure chords to still land on the same place. But it transitions right in, and I don't want to cut off Herbie, but Herbie and Wayne are also, kind of a combo. Every time Wayne's writing a new album during that period, Herbie's on it. And Wayne was exploring a lot of new sounds. And I think when you look at Kenny Kirkland as a composer, his sounds, you look at Chance and Deenda, they remind me more of Wayne tunes than anything. And he talks about how Wayne was his favorite composer, and he knows all of Wayne's standards and stuff like that. But yeah, how those sounds are affected, I think it just directly plays out of Herbie and Wayne right into Kenny Kirkland. And, Kenny Kirkland will talk about taking a 2-5, and instead of it being a minor 2 and dominant 5, he might make the first 2 a major 7 sharp 5. And those are you're still playing with the same root, but those are the colors that you're getting out of Herbie and Wayne and the guys that are, exploring a little more dense harmony, and that's how you get to Kenny Kirkland, in my opinion, out of Herbie. But yeah, Herbie's, Herbie is to Wayne what McCoy was to Coltrane. They're both there during these periods of growth and a lot of composition, and everyone got dragged up, I think, because of it.
Yeah. I saw Herbie and Wayne together in New Jersey. And just like lifelong buddies. And they were just having fun on stage. It's like the audience wasn't even there. And Herbie had his little laptop, and he's just like messing around, making random sounds, and Wayne's will respond with 2 notes. It was great. It was like a conversation between friends. But yeah, let's talk about Kenny Kirkland. So. how did you get into Kenny Kirkland? He's someone that I've known about, but never really did a deep dive until I started talking with you. So tell me about your Kenny Kirkland story.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely came through Donald. It came through me trying to push forward through these guys and then saying, okay, what's next? I think I was still aware of Brad before I was even aware of Kenny, and it was kind of the missing period, that 80s period. I was pretty late to Mulgrew too, like for any deep dives. But, Kenny became the guy for the Marsalis brothers go-to out of the 80s. And so it's like, okay, if you want to see what kind of stuff made a splash, it usually leads you to Wynton and Branford and those albums, any of Wynton's, but also that Black Codes from the Underground record. And it's hard music, but Kenny never makes it sound hard. Donald told me, Donald would do a lot of producing. He still produces Kenny Garrett's records and stuff like that. And he told me that Kenny was maybe the only person that he's ever been in the studio and never seen him do a bad take, where every take just flowed out of him like water, and that it was just, he could do no wrong. And so, yeah, I was trying to look at after looking at the four guys we just talked about, okay, well, what do you do with all that? They're all kind of different. How do you assimilate it? And I think Kenny Kirkland is really good at all of that. Mulgrew's a different beast, and they both have a lot of the same tools, but how they use them is maybe different. Kenny is very hard driving. I'd say that comes from the McCoy thing, that if you had to, there's a fire there, and he is maybe a little more locked into time, and so that's a good thing if you're trying to play in time and everything. But he also, he didn't break. I probably have 30 examples in the book, and they're bits and pieces of everything we've talked about from these other guys. Here's Kenny doing a diminished scale through this whole chunk. Here's him moving things around in thirds. Here's him on giant steps at first when he's playing giant steps, because that form is somewhat limiting. You need to keep playing the form, and you're trapped in that cycle. Well, how can you make it grow? Well, at first he's maybe playing two-note voicings in thirds, and then it grows, and as it gets bigger, he starts maybe playing in fourths, and it's these subtle ways of assimilating all these guys that we talked about as ways to grow within your solos or access new sounds while soloing on the same old thing. I know giant steps isn't the same old thing to everyone, but even if it was the standard, he would be doing that same stuff where he starts with thirds, maybe starts with a traditional sound, and then goes to that more open sound, so you kind of grow with him through the solo, which is really, really intelligent.
And the challenge of having your accompaniment subtly grow, I mean, that's just such an indicator of mastery and being comfortable playing at the high demands of giant steps, crazy tempo, crazy harmonic motion. When I play giant steps, I'm still let me make sure I'm outlining the harmony. I'm still at that I don't know. I want to say I'm crawling, but I'm not running. I'm still walking.
And there's different ways to approach that. I eventually found out there's a album called Ollie Jackson's Big Brown Get Down from 2006 or 7, and it's got Aaron Goldberg on piano, and he's playing giant steps. And what Donald showed me, just for our own knowledge, is that giant steps, it's moving through these three major things, and so if you have the augmented scale, you can't really hit a wrong note there as you go through So that's something that Aaron Goldberg is doing, just like you were talking about when you go to Keith on Olio, where it's actually a great piece of language, but he stays on it for 5 courses. He's playing it in different rhythms. He's having fun with it, but it's you wouldn't want to just do that. It's just a chunk that you can take and say this works. But it's not the end all. And so I thought about what you said with your chunk of Keith and on Olio, where you're well, this is good stuff. He's playing it, but this isn't all I want. And that's what Aaron Goldberg is playing. Whereas Kenny plays basically bebop language the whole time, and then adds fourths or adds pedal tones or adds some diminished tones and things like that. And so it's interesting to see what modern masters do with the same material. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And then, obviously Kenny also went pop, which was not popular either. He went and played with Sting. He's on from Sting's debut album. And then he went and played for the Tonight Show band. And I think some people gave them some crap for that, which is interesting. Even after Herbie kind of broke down some walls, that there were still some more that had to get broken down by Kenny Kirkland and Branford. And so they went and he played Tonight Show band and all that. And then Kenny, had an untimely death in 1998. He had heart failure, and he basically had a chance at 50-50. If you get the surgery, you could live or you could die on the table. And so he just passed on the surgery and then died in I believe in late November of 1998. So Kenny has just about an 18-year, 19-year career. So it's, not as long as the other guys. Most of all those other guys have lived full lives. Luckily, we got a lot out of them.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And it makes you wonder what Kenny Kirkland may have grown into. You never know. Certain people, some people feel that way about Jerry Allen, where Jerry Allen was doing certain things in the 80s, and then in the 90s, she maybe started absorbing more Herbieisms and actually sounding more like Herbie. Sometimes people almost go back to tradition, while other people keep pushing into new territory. And it's their life. However you want to sound is how you should sound,
I'm glad you brought up Jerry Allen. She's one of my favorites, especially of that period, that is able to instill all of those various modern techniques and have it come out so fluidly and so effortlessly and masterfully.
She's even more so, because she's taken from that avant-garde vibe. She is really floating over the beat, but then at any time she'll lock right into where she wants to be, and just you know that she's doing it intentionally. It's this really nice balance. She was your number one, right, on your Women in Jazz? Was she your number one?
She was.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I mean, that's a good number one. She really got the job done. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say one more thing on Kenny. Do you hear specific kind of delineations of his development in the same way that you might hear the evolution of Chick or the evolution of Herbie? Does Kenny have oh man, this is where he's really locked into bebop, and here's where he starts to explore with this and that?
I would say Kenny came out pretty blazing. It's he's on. The earliest records he's on are on Miroslav Vidas stuff, which is the bass player on Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, and it's almost free. So I know of Kenny's early, comeuppance that he was a classical guy, and then he started meeting the jazz guys, and right when he was about 20, and it's like he just absorbed everything like a sponge. I think Kenny certainly had a special brain. I will say that it's weird because of how he was recorded. He was recorded on free stuff. Then he's recorded on pretty forward-thinking modern stuff with the Marsalis stuff, or definitely on the forward end of standards. And then he's playing pop. And so it's you aren't going backwards with him, but you're seeing these devices. In the book, there's one thing he talks about on one of the Sting tunes where he'll always go to this Latin thing, where he's just playing, octaves, and he's playing them, maybe with a line cliche. There's an interview about that exact thing. Do you like that Latin thing? You do it a lot, and from Keyboard Magazine, he was like, oh yeah, I always try and get into that on this Sting tune just to access the Latin sound. And so earlier, I don't know that I know him doing that much in those early, because it's free stuff, right? So if anything, he's working it out, but because of how he's recorded, you just kind of get new Kennyisms as he goes along. But when you listen to those straight ahead with Wynton, it's from the first record on, he's just smoking, and he's got all that language. How he developed it so fast, I don't know, but he somehow shows me the least evolution, I would say, because he just seems to have
That
it
is
all.
the mind. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess it's good because everything of his that I've isolated, you can basically find throughout his career. You don't have to listen to a period, which is nice. It's like, okay, he always kind of had this, and so you can go to the first Quentin record, or you can go to one 15 years later from 1996 with him playing as a sideman. He's probably doing the same stuff. And Brad's kind of interesting that way too. We go to early Brad, and Brad eventually gets into that stuff where he's doing stuff in his right hand, and then he'll get real fluid on the left hand. And man, even like on that earliest like anthropology or like earliest recordings, it's like he's kind of worked that out. It's like the Bradisms, and so I know that they had to develop it, but somehow they were able to develop it before even being recorded. And I don't know, how we reflect on that. Like, you pick your concepts, you get them in as fast as you can, and it's interesting how that seems to have been absorbed. But Kenny's like always just been smoking since day one is the best way I can put it.
I love that.
Yeah, trying to think of
Let's pivot to any advice you have for teachers specifically that want to get their students inspired by jazz piano or listening to jazz piano. Do you have any tips on transcription or learning language or listening? Is there anything that if you could help teachers out, what would you tell them for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I know everyone has their own different feelings about transcription and how to go about doing it. And, I will say for me, it depends on how much time you have. That's one thing. Is like whether or not you want to sit there and write notes out and then read them while playing. That's how I would first do transcriptions as a guy coming out of classical. But I found that over time, I much better absorbed a transcription if I just listened to it and played it and never wrote it down. So that I was getting it in my ear, getting the ear-to-hand connection more direct, and not using the eyes as a crutch. You're internalizing things deeper. And then if you want to, at the end, write it down, is what I would say. I am a big advocate of doing left-hand transcription. When I see a transcription of line playing and there's no left hand, I go, I wonder what he was playing in his left hand. I always want to know. And so, I always try and get two-handed transcriptions is one thing. I mean, there's omnibooks. You can get language from the right hand, but I think it's good to see, as pianists, we're two-handed instrumentalists, so why neglect both hands or one hand over the other? And then Donald told me at one point, look, if something out there is already transcribed, save yourself the time and look at the transcription if you think it's good. You don't have to just transcribe something again, that will save you time to learn that thing and then go transcribe something else instead of just taking the time to do that. I also used to do full transcriptions. Now I definitely believe in chunks for language. I know some people are all about moving a piece of language through all 12 keys. Absolutely. Moving a transcription through all 12 keys, I don't know that I would do that. Even Tatum, I don't know if you've ever seen that book, I think it's The Right Hand According to Tatum. It's all these runs.
I got that.
Yeah, and there's somewhere in there where he talks about, look, I do certain things in certain keys on the piano because they fit into the hand that way.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not, this will not work in all 12 keys. And that's something that you need to fight, you need to pick that battle. Is this something I want to do in all 12 keys, and is that feasible? Or is this something that lends itself to the piano in this key, that, all that stuff, Tatum stuff, and then black keys. It's like you're either doing it on a white key scale or a black key scale. You want to do one that has a little bit of both. It's going to start getting more mucky and more trouble than it's worth real fast. So that's something I try and stress teachers. I'm trying to think what else.
What about learning someone's book, learning someone's tune? I've heard some people like on the one polarized end, like, oh, if you want to call someone an influence, you better learn their book, kind of thing. Where then also I think, like, I remember I asked Branford point blank, like, do you transcribe? He's like, no, I absorb everything by ear. So like,
and that's what I've heard Cyrus Chestnut say. That I was at a Boston master class and someone asked Cyrus Chestnut, how much did you transcribe? How much did you listen or do that? And he was like, I really didn't. He's like, for about 2 years, all I did was walk around with headphones on, listening to Red Garland and getting that sound in my ear. And he said that I feel like I assimilated a lot of that sound by just constantly absorbing. And there's something to be said about that. If you, especially if you're on the go and you can't sit down, well, if that's what these masters think the next best way to absorb the information is, then we probably should heed their wisdom.
And even less specifically about transcribing, because I mean, like, I think transcribing is great if you have the time. I'm 100% on board with that.
Yeah.
What do you think about like learning their original tunes? Like, I think that's like a slight difference,
Oh, absolutely. I think it is, because you gotta. I mean, you obviously want to stylize things in your own way. But especially with more modern tunes, like you don't just generalize Wayne's harmonies. You got to really nail those harmonies, and I think that's its own troubleshooting. Whereas with real book stuff and more the traditional sound, you kind of know what you're going to do with it, or you can take some liberties. You can make that minor 2/5 into both dominants, and it's not going to change the world. But Wayne stuff, that was something when I was in Illinois, like guys would bring in originals and I would be trying almost to fatten it up too much with my own stuff. And I had a teacher there, the guy who runs the program, Chip McNeil, being like, look, he wants this thing with a flat 6 sound. He's like, that's all you need to focus on. You get those bass tones in and you get exactly that tension he wants and you sit on it. Don't feel like you have to do more than that. Nail the sound he wants and let it ring. And that was a really good one for me, because sometimes we're, as pianists, we're expected to do a little more that's on the page, to add more, life to it, or movement and color. But sometimes that can be defeating because you're trying to put in too much instead of just letting a color hang. And I think that's why Wayne's stuff is good, because he hangs on tunes. You listen to how Herbie does it, and he's... they don't write minor major on a lot of the stuff, but a lot of times that's what Herbie's doing too. And I think the more you explore those modern sounds, you go, oh, he's adding this little extra something on it, or this is written on it, I better get to it. I think it's very, very valuable to pick people you like's tunes and get inside of them that way. I think,
That's such a good point. And I feel like there's a tension with that, and if we're talking about like teachers having to wrestle with that. Like for me, I didn't listen to a lot of modern stuff early on. I mean, like I've always loved Monk.
Yeah.
I listened to Dolphy, but that would be like, and then I really got into the second great quintet, but I would rarely move beyond that because I was like, man, I'm not done absorbing bebop. I'm not done absorbing hard bop.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was playing a tune. A kid wrote a super modern tune. It had like negative harmony and those major chords with flat sixes and all that kind of stuff, or minor chords with flat sixes.
Right.
And he just was getting so frustrated with me, and I was getting so frustrated because I didn't know what he wanted, and I wish I had your professor there to tell me, because I'm just playing like Bill Evans. I'm doing the Bill Evans school. Like, all of the chords, all the passing chords, everything has a 9th and an 11th, or like it's...
Yeah. And we think that that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like until someone says you're doing too much, or that's more than I wrote. That's why I think it's good to do that with the composer of a tune, because they generally have a very specific idea, especially when you're dealing with people that are writing those kinds of chords. And for better or worse, they'll let you know. They'll let you know they want their tune played the way they want it, and sometimes it's good to be at the whim of someone else, because that teaches us things in our own way by the restrictions that are given to us. And so, yeah, I hope I hope that you guys came to a happy medium. But I've been through the same thing. There's the same exact stuff, man. It's like someone writes a tune with a very specific idea, and that's what they want. And if you try and do something else, they're going to say that's not it. And so you learn the hard way, but it makes you better.
There's a lesson for teachers. Do what the composer says.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's interesting because jazz is like, it's sketched out for us a lot of times. When we're learning through that real book, it's not often very specific. I mean, I remember that being a big thing for me when I was trying to learn how to navigate minor tunes like Softly in the Morning Sunrise, the function of the minor sixth versus the minor seventh. Like, I would listen to Sonny Clark, and he's always grabbing C, E flat, A. He's always grabbing a sixth. And I was like, so is that what I'm supposed to, this is the correct way? And that was just through watching performance practice, because it's never notated. It just says minor seventh, but everyone's grabbing a minor sixth.
Yeah.
That minor sixth sound. And so sometimes what's notated, it's not because Sonny Clark didn't write that. Someone took it and made a lead sheet out of it, and they took out some of those subtleties that were actually put in there by the playing. And so it's a balance. It can go both ways, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And that gets back to learning through recordings, learning through listening. Jazz is an oral language.
So the paper's not gospel like it is from, the classical people, because they didn't even, unless you're getting a lead sheet from the composer himself or herself, you're maybe not getting all the information. Always be skeptical.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember I did a deep dive trying to figure out Nefertiti because I was doing it for a buddy's recital, and like the lead sheet is wrong. So I was looking up like interviews with Herbie, like trying to get to the bottom of this, and it's exactly what you were saying. Like, Wayne didn't write E major 7 sharp 11. He wrote this.
Right.
You play this. This is what you're supposed to do. So.
Yeah, and that little extra bit of homework, sometimes it can be a pain, but it's worth it. Like, that's how you get those deeper understandings of all these little subtleties, I think, that these guys are doing through that deep diving, and that just makes you better. You say, okay, now I know what that sound is. I can re-access it on my own terms and stuff like that. That's a good tune. I did the same thing with like Pinocchio too. There's tunes like that. You don't exactly know what they wrote. Yeah, I dig it. But that's the nice thing is we have Wayne's tunes. I'm surprised there isn't like an official Wayne book by Wayne. But maybe there isn't. I don't know about it.
Yeah. Maybe they'll do like, I have the Oscar Peterson Omni book where someone did some pretty hardcore transcribing. Maybe someone will do that for Wayne.
Right. And there's bad transcriptions. The Hampton Hawes book, it has a bunch of runs that are totally off. Like, they aren't, someone just phoned it in on those runs, and I realized that you have to just retranscribe when you realize it's wrong. Sometimes you'll run into that too.
Yeah, I wanted to get a Fats Waller book, and it was the same thing. I did a little bit of research, and people are like, this thing is just filled with errors.
Right.
Filled with what people think he played, not what he actually played.
And that's why Donald told me to find every transcription, or when I'm looking, find everything by Bill Dobbins. Bill Dobbins is the guy who, you know about Bill? Yeah.
I mean, he did Now He Sings, Now He Stops. He did the entire thing.
Right, I have that thing. I've got a couple other old books of his from the 60s. Donald said that there is no one who transcribes more accurately than Bill Dobbins. So if you're ever looking for a source for certain things, Now He Sings, Now He Stops, that's awesome. And then there's other stuff too. I forget what else he did. But he's like, you can count on that. So finding people that you can count on, which there's only so many.
You have his the Contemporary Jazz Pianist series.
I don't know if I do. I have a PDF of a bunch of stuff, but I don't know if I do.
This can be what we close on because I know we're already over time. But
it's all good.
We did a 4-volume set.
That's it. See, I only had PDFs. I never had a hard copy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did 4 volumes, and it is the most comprehensive jazz piano thing. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
Like
Yeah,
just
I mean,
like
it's-
every iteration of a 2/5.
Right.
And I'd be interested. It'd be like a really unique experiment to get a jazz musician to do the whole entire series from square one, because like it starts off with like just pages and pages of left hand chords. Like get these so ingrained in your playing, because his whole thing is like, if you have to think about what you want to play, it's too late.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it makes sense.
So, but then also, I feel like the player in me would be like, I want to play tunes, man. I don't want to play.
Sure,
chords
that's the
anymore.
tough part. Like, maybe picking some of those voicings and then applying them to a tune. Like, there's a guy named it's like Ed Palinteri or something. He was a Chisano student, and he wrote a book like My Time with Lenny, and I went and got it. But like, it was kind of crazy. Some of it was like, just play this left-hand voicing like 50 times. Now here's a slight subtlety. Like it was very much overkill of that in a sense. But I know they're trying to get to somewhere with that. I don't mean to sell it short, but it was a bit daunting when you see it on a piece of paper. There's no timeline for it. It's like, am I just going to play these left-hand chords for like years until I can move on? It's hard to figure out, okay, how much time do I spend on this? Versus whatever else I'm learning. And I think that's a big thing for us as students too. It's like, I remember looking at an interview with Oscar where he said like he spent his morning practicing tunes, but when he was coming up, and then he spent his whole afternoons practicing two-hand voicings for comping and whatever. That's what he said, at least at a period of time. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of time to spend on just comping voicing. So, I've always kind of stuck with that too, and remembered be like, okay, don't be afraid to practice comping and things like that. If Oscar took the time just to do that for hours, like it's something probably worth doing.
That's a good point for teachers. Yeah, like telling them like get your students to practice comping. Because I remember it stuck with me when a teacher said like 90% of what you're going to do isn't soloing. Like when you're playing like in a band, like unless you're maybe like in a trio or doing a solo gig, but if you're in like a jazz, like a big band or something, or in a quartet, most of what you're going to do is comping. So you can't phone that in.
Right. Yeah, I wish I had a copy. When I was in the master's program with Donald, there was one other guy in it, and I chose to do the Coltrane Sound, what was it? Whatever that song is. The Night Has a Thousand Eyes, the two versions of it. He did a project where all he did was transcribe Chick and Herbie comping on tunes. And they're comping voicings and they're comping rhythms. And it was some really, really crazy stuff. Like, just, I don't know, like a 6 chord, I'll grab from Chick now, what is it? That's a Chick. He's building it in fourths instead of your so what. He's going, G, C, F, B flat, and then putting that 6 on top. So it's that 6 thing we were talking about, which is a little more abrasive, and I think he grabs that somewhere, and now he sings, and now he stops for a second, just saying, okay, that's an out sound, that's something I move through all keys, and just figuring out, picking those battles. But, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you tell us where we can find you on social media or streaming services?
Sure. You can find my jazz basically at Spotify, iTunes, any of those places. Geoffrey Dean, Jeff with a G, Geoffrey. And then I also make electronic music as Baraka. And then, let's see, what was the other thing? Just, I guess, socials? Yeah. What kind of puppy is it?
This is a mix of some type of sheepdog and something else.
Oh, I love a doggy. Yeah. And then you,
Thank you so
then
much
you
for
can find my
coming.
Instagram at what is it, Instagram.com/Geoffrey Dean Music. I've got an album coming out on Cellar Records in April, April 3rd. I just established a relationship with them. A second album with that same personnel, with Harish Raghavan on bass, Eric Bender on drums, Justin Copeland, all original music.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah, we had done all the hard bop stuff and felt like, that was the foundations of what we're coming out of, but we also wanted to show our compositional side and that we can play, while we love traditional, we also can play more modern music too, so it's just a nice mix of everything, and that'll start rolling out next year. So yeah, man, yeah. But I just I appreciate you, and I appreciate This Is Jazz, and I can't wait to keep supporting y'all and keep doing what you're doing, because this is great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the knowledge.